A lot of people don't really want to talk about what goes on in my country, simply being you want to protect the image, but there's no image to protect if little kids are being kidnapped.
Why was that important for you to send that message across? What were you telling the world?
As much as I, was happy to do the World Cup, we also have to understand that there are things going on, back home in our country, which we have the power to, let the world know through our own means. When I say our own means, where's my power? My power is in music, performances. We have these students that have been missing, still not found. So yeah, I use my platform to, project what's really going on.
A recent string of abductions involving opposition figures and government critics has once again thrust Uganda into an uncomfortable national conversation. How does a country governed under a constitutional democracy continue to grapple with practices many believed belonged to its darkest chapter of history? The abduction of senior lawyer and former Kampala Lord Mayor Erias Lukwago yesterday has become the latest episode in a trend that has increasingly unsettled rights advocates, legal practitioners and ordinary citizens alike. Lukwago, who was representing opposition figure Dr. Kizza Besigye in an ongoing treason case, was seized by armed men from his residence before his whereabouts became publicly known through a tweet made by the Chief of Defense Forces General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who boasted on how he had captured a fool and had him in his basement. The circumstances surrounding his abduction have sparked widespread condemnation and renewed fears over the shrinking space for due process. For many Ugandans old enough to remember, the scenes evoke painful memories of an era when state power often operated without restraint. Under the military regime of Idi Amin between 1971 and 1979, arbitrary arrests, disappearances and detentions became instruments of governance.
Some people think that we decided to fight Idi Amin because Idi Amin was killing people. No, we didn't even know that Idi Amin would kill people. We just said, Amin, no, don't waste our time. We've been on a journey. We were having enough problem with Obote because Obote was not fully with us, but he was also not, it was just like that. This side, the other side, not reliable, but not totally opposed to our ideas. That's why we were Kubembeleza Obote. We were trying to massage Obote so that we can see whether we move forward. But now Idi Amin, it was clear that he didn't understand what he was doing. So we said, Idi Amin, out. Please don't waste our time. That's why we decided to fight Idi Amin.
The reason we fought Amin was not because Amin was killing, the killing people came later. But we were in our Uganda, in our journey of Africa, unity, Pan-Africanism. Now we could see Amin could not understand.
People would be abducted and they would disappear, never to hear from them again. The case of Ben Chwanka, the case of Frank Ramsey, the case of Archbishop Janan Loom, and the ministers. So it was really that somebody would disappear and never to hear from them again.
The subsequent governments of the late Apollo Milton Obote, particularly during the early 1980s, inherited a deeply fractured nation. Although the context differed, allegations of arbitrary arrests, extrajudicial killings and abuses committed during counter-insurgency operations equally strained that period. It was against this backdrop that the national resistance movement came to power in 1986, promising a fundamental change rather than a mere change of guard. Central to that promise was restoring constitutionalism, ending impunity, and rebuilding institutions capable of protecting citizens from excesses of state power.
When the abductions continued, they made Ugandans hopeless. Hopeless in a sense that the only way out was rebellion. That's how people like President Yoweri Museveni came up with Fronasa, and other groups came up, Kikosi Maalum, helped by Tanzania, to ensure that Amin was overthrown. So that Ugandans really can jubilate, can live happily in their country.
Yet the persistence of reported abductions continue to test that promise. From the drone arrests witnessed during previous electoral cycles to the disappearances of opposition supporters, activists and government critics, concerns have repeatedly been raised by civil society organizations, religious leaders and international rights groups. The language may have changed, but for some observers, the methods appear hauntingly familiar.
So if we're having political issues, it should then be quite clearly and succinct within their mind and realm of work that political issues should be sorted out politically.
The challenge, therefore, lies not in whether the state has the authority to arrest suspects. It undoubtedly does. The issue is whether those powers are exercised transparently, accountably, and within the confines of established legal procedures.
So for me, the central question then would be, if we have legitimate institutions, why are these things happening? Because if somebody was picked up, if, say, the police wanted somebody, the Police Act is very clear on how you summon a suspect. If the suspect is of high-profile nature, like this case, the former Lord Mayor Lukwago, there should be an opportunity to invite him to the police station if he has a case to answer.
History teaches that when nations rarely descend into authoritarian tendencies overnight, it happens incrementally. When extraordinary methods become normalized, when institutions hesitate to question excesses, and when citizens begin to accept exceptions to the rule of law as routine.
When people get such kind of feeling that the law is not being respected, then it becomes a danger in a sense that, one, they can go quiet, and when they go quiet, that's not a good signal. The more we instill fear in people, at a certain time that fear also denies you the opportunity to get exactly what are people's real feelings about particular situations and about particular projects.
For a nation that once vowed never again to the excesses of its past, the true measure of progress lies in ensuring that no Ugandan, regardless of political affiliation or status, disappears beyond the protection of the law. Because when fear begins to overshadow due process, history has a way of asking difficult questions about whether the lessons of yesterday were ever truly learned.
A few moments later.
When you hear my son's name, Mhozi, when he was born, I said, now I have got somebody to avenge me. That's what his name means. Now that I have got a boy, this is the one who will avenge me in case I am something wrong is done to me. Mhozi, the clan, was the one revenging on behalf of the offended.
On January 19th, towards the crack of dawn, a coterie of security personnel under the cover of the Velvet Dark raided the home of George Kasumba in Chakonda Ward, Nebisasa Sub-County in Chotera District. They flung open the door to the house, grabbed him and carted him off. 23 months later, the father of 4 has never been seen or heard from again.
All I know, he was taken by security men.
His mother, Agnes Nanuno, says if her son was killed, the government should return his remains so that he can be given a dignified send-off.
If he is not dead, then they should charge him before courts and sentence him to whatever years they want. At least then we can tell his children that their father is in prison for 20 or so years.
Kasumba was abducted on the eve of the election for local council leaders. He had thrown a hat in the ring for the position of LC5 for Kasali Town Council in Chotera. However, his mother says he was not involved in any riots.
I just want one thing, to know his resting place, either prison or a gravesite. He won't be the first person killed by the state and won't be the last. But the comfort we want is knowing that he is somewhere, dead or alive.
The family continues to deal with trauma over their missing son, who was also the breadwinner. Nobody knows whether he's alive or dead. A week before his abduction, security personnel had abducted 18 NUP supporters from Kasali Town Council. More than 2 months later, most of them were dumped in various parts of Chotera. They bore torture marks inflicted on them in ungazetted dungeons where they were held. As such, Kasumba's family initially thought he would return home like the rest of his colleagues, but they continue to await the day he reunites with his loved ones. His relatives, who spoke anonymously for fear of reprisal, revealed that they have been warned by people claiming to work for the government to desist from speaking to the media, which could elicit dire consequences. According to the National Unity Platform Party, scores of their supporters were abducted by security in the aftermath of November 18th to 19th, 2020 Kampala riots, where about 54 people were killed. Amongst the missing persons are John Bosco Chibalama, who was abducted by security in June 2019 in Kanyanya, Michael Semudu, John Damulira, Moses Mbabazi, Vincent Nalamusoko, Martin Lukwago, Muhammad Kanata, Yuda Sempija, Musisimboa, Peter Kiria, Shafix Wangolo, Dennis Zimula, Mustafa Luemba, Mubiru Hassan, and George Kasumba, among others. Family members of the missing persons continue to live in fear. Mid this month, Damulira's brother, Charles Chiganda, who has been outspoken about his missing brother and appeared in several media interviews, was arrested by security personnel and later dumped at the Central Police Station in Kampala. The reason for his arrest remains unknown, though he was recently granted bond after the family paid money.
November 2020 killings or the riots, it was a turning point regarding the kidnaps, the detention in ungazetted places, the detention without trial. That's when we saw an increase in the number of people picked up by the so-called drones and held. So many of the people who are picked up under those circumstances, some have fortunately been produced in court, military courts, and remanded. Of course, we know that that is an abuse in itself, because trying civilians in military courts ordinarily shouldn't be something that we take pride of, especially we have a constitutional court ruling to that effect. But many were held up in detention without trial for months. Many times we would go to court, apply for habeas corpus, then after a while they either dump them along the road or release them without charge, or charge them, military courts and remand. Many of them are still on remand, or some are still on remand. Some are facing those criminal charges, those who have been lucky to get bail.
Little progress has been made in terms of ensuring access to justice for the families of those who lost their lives, or for one reason or the other suffered damage or harm. The demands have been made against the state repeatedly, calling for investigations into those events, and of course the necessity for a report to be made public by government out of their investigations. There is an outstanding demand that the perpetrators of those killings be held accountable. There is still an outstanding demand for remedies in favor of those people's families who either lost their loved ones or had their family members being harmed.
Establishing the whereabouts of the missing persons has specifically proved difficult for family members because the command structure of who sanctioned or carried out the abduction of civilians remains blurred. During the reign of terror under Amin and Obote, the army and security outfits that operated through loose command structures wielded immense powers and by impulse determined the fate of hundreds kidnapped. The late Justice Arthur Odell-led Commission of Inquiry report published in 1994 painted a grim picture of the actions of the operation of these security outfits, particularly in disappearing thousands of Ugandans, many of whom were never seen again between 1971 and 1979. In Uganda's political parlance, the word disappearance is a euphemism for civilians taken by security operatives without disclosed offense, taken to an unknown location, and without certainty about their return. Often, 1994 Commission report noted that the army and police denied involvement in the disappearance of persons. According to the report and the court, once such denials were made, perpetrators of abuses could not be brought to justice because you cannot punish offences in the commission of which you have publicly denied. The report reads in part, the official denials therefore provided protection to the violators of human rights. Livingstone Sewanyana, the executive director of the NGO Foundation for Human Rights Initiative, says a law was passed under Amin stating a time frame within which relatives should forget about their relative.
In his time, there was a decree passed in 1974 called the Missing Persons Decree. That decree did make provision for a time frame within which a person would be declared, missing, and therefore all efforts would cease to establish the whereabouts of that person. That decree was repealed. So at the moment, we do not have such a legal framework for any person who goes missing. The assumption is that Uganda then sought to be a democratic state, and as such, the state became responsible for every individual, every citizen.
He says government must account for its citizens.
There have been cases where some family members have approached us and we have filed habeas corpus applications calling upon the state to produce these people, but we have not yet yielded results. So it remains a blot on Uganda's human rights record.
Today, there are about a dozen security agencies carved out of police and the army, the notable ones being CMI, Joint Anti-Terrorism Task Force JAT, Internal Security Organization ISO, Special Forces Command SFC, Directorate of Crime Intelligence, among others. However, their command structure remains opaque. For instance, as anxiety over kidnapping of civilians deepened last year and this year, between August and September, police often feigned ignorance on the matter. The victims' relatives often accuse police of shirking their responsibility to investigate whenever a case of missing person was reported. At various press conferences, the police and army spokespersons respectively have denied knowledge of the whereabouts of the missing persons. Human rights lawyer George Musisi says the state owes a duty of care to its citizens and will be held accountable in regard to the missing persons.
There are those who are still missing. In fact, many times we even think that if you are produced, however shabby meet what would be, at least your relatives can go and look at you in Chitalia. You have the degree of responsibility that where you can be traced from. But sadly, many have not been traced. A couple of people have not been traced. Either they were held up or they were killed. But at least their families have not got the closure. They have not got the degree of knowing that at least my person was either killed and buried or he is held in this detention facility. So the risk can only be for speculating.
He said the fragmentation of security agencies and the covert deployment of personnel who raid and abduct civilians without identification has created a climate of fear and uncertainty.
After the riots, there were about 12 people who couldn't be accounted for. We thought that they had been killed or held. Up to now, we don't know. There are 6 others on top of the 12 who were held shortly after the riots. That is when the drone kidnaps started taking a strong root in people's daily lives. There are about 6 up to now who at least we can confirm that they were held. Some of those whom were held with them are still there or have been released, but the 6 of them have never been accounted for. 2 of them were from Mukono. I think one of them is called Yuda, another one is Kanata Muhammad. They are from Mukono. They were picked up as a group of 12. The 10 have subsequently been released. The 2 have never been accounted for. And 4 others who we've tried all different options. Of course, this list was bigger at the time, but subsequently some people have always been, there are some other 2 boys whom we had to go to court and we had to wait for over 8 months, getting habeas corpus. Court released, issued all the orders, unconditional release, but they couldn't be traced. Then they appeared on the president's list, they didn't appear on the minister's list laid before parliament, and eventually they were dropped without charge in different parts.
In his February 13, 2021 address on the security situation in the country, following a spate of arbitrary abductions of NUP supporters by security operatives driving vans, popularly known as drones, President Museveni ordered security agencies to produce a list of all individuals in custody as a method of accountability for those who were missing. The president said the CMI had arrested 177 persons who were granted bail or released, while another 65 were still being investigated.
What was the original purpose?
Later in March 2021, Museveni detailed in a missive dated February 23rd that at least 51 people who disappeared were in the custody of the Special Forces Command, broadening the range of security actors who operate below the radar in the enforcement of these abductions. The SFC is an elite outfit within the Uganda People's Defence Forces UPDF, and its core job is guarding the president and vice president, top state guests and officials, as well as key national installations. However, it has periodically been deployed on special operations at battlefronts, and its commandos, according to President Museveni, subdued street insurrections and liquidated violent rioters. Some of the families talked to indicated that the names of their relatives were among the list of names President Museveni mentioned in his previous speeches, but continued to search for their relatives in vain. Security agencies have engaged in an exercise of smoke and mirrors. In the same vein of accounting for missing persons, government has for the most part remained indifferent on the question of compensating the families of the people killed during the November 18th to 19th protests. A police probe concluded that the 49 out of the 54 killed were going about their business when they were killed, contrary to earlier claims that the deceased were protesters.
And is the pain of bodies on the brink of death?
NUP convened a memorial last week, but police fired tear gas at those who had gathered to honor the dead. The endless calls for accountability have routinely put government and Western donors on a collision path. On November 18th, the European Union said they wait for a full report and perpetrators brought to book, while the Germany embassy said separately, and I quote, "The 54 victims who were shot by security forces are not forgotten." Sewanyana says there must be a relentless demand for justice and accountability, citing the case of Chile, where it took more than 20 years to bring the hatchet men during Augusto Pinochet's 17-year reign of terror to book. Pinochet was arrested in October 1998 for the various human rights crimes committed during his reign.
The Fund for Peace has issued a report where among its rankings it has shown Uganda among the 19 countries that are called fragile states. And once a country is declared fragile, then of course it shows that a lot needs to be done in order to improve. Otherwise it can become a failed state. And once a state is a failed state, then there is lawlessness, generally a higher degree of despondence, and no one is held accountable for their actions, a situation which we must avoid.
Filed a case regarding the missing persons because we want to bring at least closure in as far as the legal process is concerned. The case is yet to be allocated and assigned, but it's in the civil division of the High Court, and we are seeking to get orders that these people are produced dead or alive from the state because they were taken by state agents. Because of the length of time, we don't know whether these people are dead or where they are, But we want the state, we want at least to go on judicial record that we got an order and the orders with the effect that we don't have them from the state. And we see the next remedy. But we want to exhaust the judicial remedy to say that at least let them be declared dead.
Uganda's history is peppered with anarchy, violence and bloodshed, events which are captured in the preamble of the 1995 Constitution. The often history keeps repeating itself.